Good morning, everybody. I'm Amber with Schwarzkopf. I'm super excited to have you here. I see that some of you are already starting to type into the chat box. I see Anthony's here. Schwarzkopf fam is here for you. Today, we're going to be talking to Carly Zanoni, and we're super excited to have her. She's at the Blonde Chronicles on Instagram, so we're super excited that she's here. But before we get started, I definitely wanted to share with you some tips and tricks. So some of you are in Illinois, and if you're in Illinois, then chances are you want some CEU credit hours. So let's talk about how that works. CEU credit hours are something that we all definitely want. So what I want to do is actually see if I can try to share my screen here with you guys so that you can actually see exactly what we're talking about. But for CEU credit hours, if you're on here and you're able to type into the comments box, what you're going to want to do is type in your name and then Illinois. This way I know that you're on at the beginning, because you do need to be on at the beginning and also at the end. So just make sure that you're typing in your name so that we know that you're here. And then I'm going to pull up my slide so I can show you, but we really want to get super into this. But let me see if I can share my screen first. Share screen. There we go. All right. I'm going to share this. Take just a second. All right, for those of you that are in Illinois, we are today going to be talking about the perfect California blonde with At the Blonde Chronicles. It's going to start at 10 a.m. Pacific time, noon Central time, and it is going to go for 2 hours, just so you guys are prepared. So it is going to be a 2-hour class, and if you are in Illinois, here's what I need you to do right now. Just know you can only get credit hours if you are live currently. So if you're live and watching this, type your name into the comments box and put next to it Illinois. This way I can take a roll call. If you don't have access to the comments, email me, amber.hug@hinkle.com. Send me an email at the beginning of class that says I'm on the live version, and then I'll do another roll call at the end of class with the final instructions so that you get your CEU credit hours. And what you'll get then is an email from me with your CEU credit hour that you need to fill out and send back to me. But if you're watching this later, just remember it's only those of you that are live, because I can only give CEU credit hours for those of you who are live. But you guys aren't here to hear admin stuff, but I wanted to share that so that you have it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And this is definitely not about me, but please type into the comments if you have questions, because Carly is going to be able to answer them for you. But without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Carly.
Hey guys, how are you? Oh, let me fix my screen so you guys can see me. Good morning. I am so happy to be here. Oh, sorry. 1 second. There we go. Sorry, technical issues. Okay. I am so excited to be here. Thank you guys for having me. Thank you, Schwarzkopf. Today I'm going to take you through, I call it my smart blonding technique. It's basically just a great way to get somebody like my lovely lady here who comes in, she's all dark, she wants to be really lived in and blonde and just like natural looking. And you just want to do as much blonding as you can in, one session. I definitely am a hairstylist that works, I would say, in sessions. It's rare that I'm going to go just like full out make somebody like completely blonde all over in one time. I like to kind of build on what I've done previously, but I definitely do like to add in, make somebody generally much blonder in one session. So today I'm going to show you how to do that and give her like a lived in look. So what I'm going to start with, let me adjust this one more time. Okay, so my approach today is going to be, like I said, lived in, so a little bit Rudy. So, so sorry, you guys. I had this all situated. I don't know why it's giving me problems. Okay. So, my approach to somebody like this is I want to focus on spending time in the areas that are going to make the biggest impact for a client. And what are those areas? When a client looks in the mirror and they say that they want to see, they want to feel blonder, they're typically talking about feeling a lot blonder around their face. Feeling blonder on the ends is going to make them, being blonder on the ends is going to make them feel a lot blonder. And then up here over their part area. Those are the 3 main areas I'm going to focus on. I am going to blonde through the back of her head as well. But being mindful and keeping in mind that my main 3 areas are around the face, up here over her part, and on her ends. So I'm going to get started and jump in. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is start around her face. I have mixed up Blonde Me with 20 volume. On a real person, I would probably begin with 7 and 20 volume. Blonde Me, as you guys probably all know, is intense, and jumping right in with 20 is not something I typically do, but being that she's a doll head, I am going to start with 20 volume. So she's parted down the middle, which is where she usually parts her hair. If you have a client that parts to the side, you could absolutely do this exact same thing I'm going to do and start it on the side, or color off of her side part. If you have a client that flips around, and they sometimes do down the middle, they sometimes do a side part, I would say stick with the middle part and color off of that middle part. So the first thing I'm going to do is start on the sides here, right around her face. I like to start foiling in the front simply because I feel like I want that to be the blondest part, and I don't want to risk like waiting around for that and having to just sit around and wait for the front to process while the back is already done. So I am going to start in the front. Let's see if I can get it angled so you guys can see. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a section here. I use this comb to back comb. I'm going to do a lot of back combing today. If you didn't want to back comb, you could do like an air touch technique. I do that a lot with these kind of clients. I'm actually going to swing around here. So I'm going to back comb. You don't have to. You could definitely do an air touch technique, something like that. But for me, I feel that back combing, especially around the face, is helpful. This is like it's actually like a styling brush, like for updos and stuff to tease hair. But I love it for doing this kind of work. So I'm starting right here on her hairline. I've taken a really fine section. On a real person, this might even be more fine, but doll heads have pretty dense hair on their hairline. So on a real person, keep that pretty fine. You want this to be very blended when they pull their hair back or do ponytails or anything like that. So I'm doing a weave here, and I'm going to take my brush and just do a little back comb. Just a little bit. I am going to grab a foil, and then the other thing that I use for everybody is a board. So this is like a clear plexiglass one. There's tons out there. Different ones work for different people. I love painting with a board because I feel like it gets everything just so much more blended. It's just much easier to blend the color. It's much easier to make it a little bit more seamless, in my opinion. So I'm going in with my Blonde Me in 20 volume. This is mixed in a 1 to 1.5 ratio. And I'm painting the lightener on there. You can see I'm putting the bulk of it on with my brush flat like this. And then I kind of turn my brush and angle it and feather up that lightener. And then I'm going to pull it all the way through the ends. And I take out my board, and then I'm going to fold up this foil. Okay, I'm going to do another foil right behind that one. Same exact thing. This is something you could vary this. You could do weaves. You could do slices. I'm actually going to leave this one in a slice and just back comb a little bit of that up so that not every single piece of hair in that section gets colored. I just want to, have a soft, seamless blend, but I do want a little bit bolder piece here since she's all dark. So same exact thing. I put my foil over my board, stick the board in there, kind of going to get these little guys out of the way. And a question that comes up often is, do you ever paint on the teased part? And yeah, sometimes I do. Like the lightener will graze that. I'm not getting a ton of lightener on there because it kind of messes with your saturation a little bit. But if the lightener gets on there a little bit on that teased part, I don't find it to be a big deal at all. So I'm just saturating, getting a ton of lightener on there. And if you had a client that was already blonde and you're just kind of doing a refresh situation, I would obviously not be painting this blonde meat on the ends, the already blonde ends. But since she's all dark, I went ahead and painted it on there. Okay, so I've got 2 foils on the side here. I'm going to go to the other side of her face and do the same exact thing with those foils. And like Amber said, if you guys have any questions, stop me along the way or type them in and Amber can ask them of me. This technique is like, if you follow me on Instagram or you've seen any of my stuff, my approach to everything is just less can be more. And I think as hairstylists, we really complicate stuff and make it really, really just way too in depth. And we take 20 steps to do something that could take us 3 steps to do. So with this technique, I kind of just try and simplify this whole process. There's a million ways you could do this and get a similar result. But for me, this way is just the most efficient. It's the best way to use my time. So that's why I keep kind of going back to this technique and this placement.
Carly, real quick, I'm getting some questions. So some of you may not have an account with YouTube. So if you're in Illinois and you don't have an account, I did put it into the chat box, but I realize you can't see it. So if you want to text me or call or text me that you're on this, I will put up a PowerPoint here in just a minute so you can see it, but it's 312-618-0331. Again, it's 312-618-0331. I'm going to put a banner up for you, but text me any questions that you have or text me that you're on if you're from Illinois, but some of you aren't in the comments and you want to ask questions. So if you text me your questions, I can ask them to Carly as well. So I'm going to pass it back to her.
Cool. Thank you, Amber. So again, I'm doing the same exact thing here on this other side. That was my weave right along the hairline. And then right behind that, I'm going to go ahead and do a slice. And like I said, you could do 2 weaves back to back. You could do 2 slices back to back. You could do 3 slices. Kind of vary it based on what your client's looking for. I like to have kind of a bold face frame piece. But some people want it really soft and subtle. So you can just kind of, base it off of what they're looking for. And on these ones right around the face, I do bring the lightener up pretty high just because I do want to have, I do really want to have that brightness right around her face, around her hairline. On the foils that are further back on the head, you'll see that I won't be bringing the lightener up quite as high because I want that to be a little bit more rooted and a little bit more lived in. My thought on this whole thing is if you are going to root it down and melt it eventually and give them roots, there's absolutely no point in bringing your lightener up super high and then having to cover all of it up. Like, for instance, you could do this whole process and just highlight and then root it down after. But why? To me, it's just like more work for you. You have to try and fill that blonde stuff that is lifted. So for me, if I'm going to root something, I just leave some root to begin with to make my life easier. So, okay, so she's parted down the middle. Now I'm going to approach this money piece hairline up here. Nobody really has a perfect, even, straight across hairline, right? So most people have something similar to this. It kind of dips down or it's uneven. So what I like to start with on this hairline is a really, really, really fine baby light, like right on the hairline, one on either side. So I'll basically do one right here, and then I'll do one right here on the other side of her part here. And they kind of meet at a point in the middle. Now, on a real person, you have a little bit more like recession area back here. There's a lot of baby hairs back here. So these 2 little baby lights help to cover some of that and make it so that it's not, you don't have any like black holes when they pull their hair back. So this is my tiny little baby light here. And I'm not going to tease this one because I pretty much want these light pieces to start right on her hairline. And again, this is because when she wears it up, I want it to look really seamless and just not have like a bunch of holes in it or anything. So I'm just going to put my foil right up there on her, directly on her hairline. The other thing I want to mention is a way, in my opinion, to get a lot of dark hair light quickly is by doing tipping out. So if you're not familiar with what tipping out means, I basically refer to tip outs as the little pieces like in between foils that you just literally get the tips of the hair. So like for instance, she has pretty fine hair and most people do on their hairline. There's not usually a ton of tipping out that you have to do on the hairline. But if this client was really like had really dense hair and this hair was like the dropout from these foils was left, I would potentially tip out or paint lightener on this last like 3 inches of hair. I will do a ton of tipping out in the rest of the back of the hair so you guys will be able to see what I'm talking about. But just something to mention for those front sections. Okay, now I'm going over here to this other side. I'm going to do the same exact thing here and do that really fine little baby light. And as I mentioned, they're meeting right here in the middle in that center point of her head. Even if they part to the side, I would still do these 2 little baby foils that come that meet in the middle just to get the hairline, just to like make it really seamless. Another thing I want to mention is some different scenarios. Like what if the client was gray, had totally gray hair and they needed it like completely covered like with a permanent color, let's say. In a situation like that, a couple of options. You could either do the permanent base color first and let it process, rinse it out, and then begin this, dry it and then do this process. Or you could put all these foils in and then go in between the foils and paint your root color on. Or you could, it depends on how much regrowth they have. If in a case like this, I probably wouldn't opt for this, but if somebody was already blonde and they needed their roots touched up and you had to bring up a couple light pieces, you could paint on your base color first and then do all this foiling while the base color sits on there. Again, if you're doing a ton of foiling like this, like the person's really already dark or just starts out all dark or virgin hair, probably wouldn't put the base color on first because that base color will have eventually sat on there for quite a long time by the time you get all this foil work in. But there's a couple options for doing that. Okay, so now I'm starting on the rest of my money piece. I'm going right behind those 2 baby light foils. I'm taking a pretty fine section here. I'll show you guys. But it's just horizontal right across her hairline. It's, you can kind of see through it. It's pretty fine, but I'm going to weave this. And then I'm going to do the same exact thing, back comb it, and paint my lightener on. So back combing that, and you can see my weave is like medium size. It's not too tiny, it's not too chunky. Around the face here, I like to be pretty cautious with doing anything overly chunky just because it can tend to look really heavy around the face. But if you have a client that is going for that, that could be a great option. I also tend to not do anything too fine. Otherwise, it's going to get lost and they're probably not going to feel like they have much of a money piece going on. So somewhere in the middle, I think, is good. And same with these, I'm painting my lightener up pretty high because I want it to be really bright around her face when she pulls it back. And then I just make sure I have tons of saturation on there. If you guys have worked with Blonde Me before, which I'm sure you have, you know that it is super powerful, but I still want to make sure I have plenty of saturation on there, just so that everything lifts evenly and well. Once the hair gets longer, I'm just going to put 1 foil on top of my bottom foil. I feel like this really helps everything to process more evenly. Just no like uneven spots in the hair. And you can see now in these money piece sections, I'm starting to have some dropout from these sections that aren't getting in foils. And I will go back and tip that out simply because I do want it to be, really bright around her face in that money piece. I don't want to leave that hair out. Okay, now I'm going to do one more foil behind this, and then I'm going to do one more foil behind that. So the money piece is essentially 2 little baby lights right along the hairline, and then 3 back combed foils right behind it. Now you could switch this up. You could do all weaves, all slices, same thing as like I mentioned on the sides. I'm going to do 3 weaves back to back, but if you have somebody that wants a really bold money piece, like almost chunky looking, I would do 3 slices. You could do weave, slice, weave. You could really alternate and switch this up.
Carly, we actually have a couple of questions in here. Do you have a minute to answer them?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. So question 1, this girl says she always has a hard time with the top part of the head. What pattern do you suggest to help create something natural and fast? And you don't have, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, great question. And this technique is absolutely going to approach that and cover that for sure. What I'm going to do on the sides is basically diagonal back foils. And I'm only going to do like 4 to 5 foils on either side of her head. So you guys will see how I place those just to be efficient and to not spend like 5 hours foiling. But yes, I will absolutely cover that. And that's like a huge part of this service for sure.
Awesome. The other one was just, what is your mixing ratio for the lightener? I put the banner up for that, but I figured you could tell us as well.
Totally. Yeah. So it's in a 1 to 1.5 ratio. The biggest thing that I hear people say about Blonde Me is, oh, it swells so much. It swells a ton, whatever. I didn't like how it swelled. Okay, so I'm going to tell you my relationship with Blonde Me. I started using it and I was like, or I used it once and I was like, oh my God, no, I can't. This is insane. Like never again. It's just way more powerful than other lighteners in my opinion. So what I was freaked out by was like, well, for one, I mean, total disclosure, I pretty much like had some breakage. I mean, for lack of a better term, I wouldn't say I fried it, but her hair didn't feel great after because I jumped right in with 20 volume, jumped right up to 25 volume, just like I would with a lot of other lighteners. A lot of lighteners, you're totally safe to start with 20 volume on just about anybody. It went way too fast. It got way too, it swelled up a ton. And I was like, oh my God, this is insane. I can't use this stuff. I went back to it like a couple months later because everybody talks about it and raves about it. And I'm like, okay, everybody loves this stuff. Like there's got to be something that I'm doing. I'm sure this is user error. So try it again on a super dark client. I started with just 7 volume on her hairline. And I'm like, okay, there's no way this is going to work. But I also don't want to take the risk of frying her hair again. So I'm going to use 7. It lifted perfectly. By the time I needed it to be done, it was totally done. And it did swell. I messed with the ratio a little bit, but I found that 1 to 1.5 was perfect for me. The thing that I think about Blonder is like, yes, it does swell a little bit, but like the lift it can get you and the stuff that it can do compared to other lighteners is insane. So it's like, okay, it swells, but like it's one of the most powerful lighteners ever. So it's a trade-off, right? I mean, you just get used to that and you work with it instead of just trying to fight that all the time. That's my opinion about it, at least, because I feel like that comes up a lot. Like, I love Blonde Me, but it just swells too much. So try and be just like, aware that like, yeah, it does swell, but it's amazing. So you can work with it. Like, I personally don't use it for highlighting. I'd more pick Variable on Super Plus just because, yes, it does swell. And I find it to be better for teasy lights. So I love it. My favorite ratio is 1 to 1.5. That works the best for me. Okay, so you can see I've got those 3 weaved and teased foils here in the front, creating the money piece. I'm just picking out those pieces that are on either side. You guys can see this is just what's left over from that didn't get in the foil. I am going to do a tiny little tip out on these pieces just so that it looks really bold and bright around her face. If I left this, it's a minimal amount of hair, but there could be a little tiny bit of just like, looks like dark highlights going through her money piece, and I don't want that. So to tip this out, I'm literally just gonna put this down a little bit so you can see better. I'm literally just taking this section. I'm doing like one back comb there, and I'm left with this little tiny fine bit of hair. I'm just going to put that in a foil. I'm painting about the last, I'm going to paint about the last like 3 to 4 inches of it. First, I got to mix a little more product, but I'm going to paint the last 3 to 4 inches of it, and that's going to make it so that you get that look like where we've been doing this process for years, when in fact we've only done it once. The tipping out is huge. Otherwise, if you're not tipping anything out, you're left with basically just, it looks like too highlighty. Like you can see all this dark stuff through the ends. And that is not usually what people are wanting. So I'm just mixing up a tiny bit more here. And typically in the salon, you guys, I can do this process. I can put all the foils in an hour. I do work with an assistant frequently, but even on my own, I can definitely do this in an hour. So I think that, again, it's all about efficiency and spending the most time where it makes the most difference and is going to make the most impact. And like I said, to me, that's those 3 like power areas, which are right around the face, right kind of above the part, and then also on the ends. Because when people pull their hair in front of their shoulders and wear it down, the ends are a lot of what they can see. Again, this goes back to why the tipping out is so important. So to tip out, I'm literally just like feathering with my brush that tiny little section. You want to keep these tip outs really fine because, for one, you're not really getting any help from the heat from the scalp to lift them. They're far from the scalp. They're not really even hitting the person's body, so you're not getting a ton of help from the body heat to lift them. The other reason is that since the pieces start so far out from the roots, you really can't root melt these. Like all this stuff up here, I'm going to root melt it and make it blend perfectly. But these, you really can't. You can't pick out every single one and like melt them. So you just have to make sure they're blended when you put them in. And the way to do that is just fine sections. Nothing is too thick. And a little feathering with your brush and stuff too. Just fold them up. Okay, so I would, in real life, if this was a real person, kind of pin these back and pin this up a bit, like clip it up a little bit. For purposes of the class, so that all that foil is not like in your guys' line of vision, I'm going to leave it hanging down. But I absolutely recommend pinning that up a bit, just so that the client is not sitting with like huge foils covering their entire face the whole appointment. Not super welcomed by clients.
Actually, that's a question that I just got in the salon. Does she pile foils over a client's face like this?
Yeah.
So.
No, I would be clipping it up a lot more kind of as I go and putting them back. But I think it just gets really busy for you guys to see all those foils like clipped everywhere. So I would definitely, but yeah, in the salon, I would totally push them back and out of the way. So now I'm going to approach the underneath hairline down here, which I think is almost as important as that front hairline. Because if they're wearing their hair up in a ponytail, like you don't want all this stuff to be super dark. You want brightness up here. Again, these areas that matter the most and show the most. Like spend the most time where you're going to get the most bang for your buck and result. And one of those is all around the hairline. So I'm sectioning out a fine section here, and it's like kind of see-through. You guys can see it. It's pretty fine. So basically my approach to the back section here is I'm going to do 2 foils back here on one side of her hairline. I'm going to come on the other side of her hairline and do 2 foils again. And these are going to be weaved and back combed, and these are going to prevent it from looking super dark when she pulls her hair up to do like a ponytail or anything like that. So same exact thing here. I'm going to weave. If somebody had like a really like kind of bigger head and you felt like you couldn't fit all the hair in one foil like this, I would just split it up into 3. So do one here, like just a horizontal foil right on the nape of her neck, and then do one on the other side of diagonal back. I'm going to back comb it again. Get my board in there. And then same thing, I'm going to weave in, or I'm going to paint my lightener on here. I'm going up pretty high back here as well, because again, this is still the hairline when she pulls it back. I want this to be bright. And you could skip this, I guess, and just do, go up the back in whatever kind of placement you're going to do. I'll show you guys what I do, but you know what it looks like when people like have been getting a partial highlight their entire life and they pull their hair up and it's like looks like half and half. Like the underneath looks totally dark, the top looks totally light. So I'm trying to avoid that, and this is helping that. Or this is going to prevent that.
So we do have a question in the comments, and it's a great question, Lisa. Lisa Elliott is asking, if someone had been lightened multiple times, would you use the same tip out technique to low light?
Probably not to low light, simply because you'd run into issues with like, if you're back combing it and just low lighting the ends, you'd run into like there'd be a band kind of right up here of lightness, and then the low light would start. If their blonde was really, really grown out, like say it started here, you could totally do a similar technique. I wouldn't do the teasing though. I would just pick up foils or pick up hair in between each blonde foil and paint your low light on. I'll kind of discuss too, as I get to this top part, how I would put in a low light if I were needing to low light, because that's definitely a thing that happens, is people, are too blonde and you need to add dimension. So I'll discuss where I would put those low lights for sure. So this is my second foil back here, and 2 foils usually really covers this plenty. Like if they pull their hair up, this is a lot of brightness under here. I usually don't do more than 2 foils under here, but if you're really trying to get somebody crazy blonde, you could do more. But again, efficiency, like don't waste too much of your time back here, because this stuff is not showing when they have their hair down whatsoever. Even when they have their hair up, these ones disguise like this whole middle area here.
So going back to the low light question, I guess Lisa was being a little more specific. The hair that's left out and the tip out, would you low light that?
The hair that's left out in the tip out. So like you're talking about like the hair, I would assume like the hair that's left out kind of in between.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Not necessarily. I mean, that's what I mean. Like you could low light that. I just wouldn't do the teasing of it. If you wanted to low light every, the hair in between the foils that didn't get foiled, if they're already too blonde, yes, you could totally do that. I just would skip the teasing part, simply because if you did that, you'd probably end up with a band of lightener. Like, does that make sense? Like if you took this piece of hair, say that was left out, and she had lightness starting up here. Let's see if I can do a better example. She had lightness starting like from here down, and you went like this and teased this and only tipped out what was left beneath that tease, you'd have a band of lightness like right here. So you could totally low light all that. I just would skip the teasing part. But I will absolutely show you like exactly what I would do up on those side sections when I get to the side of her head, if I were to low light for sure. Okay, so I'm doing the same exact thing here over on the other side of her head. And like I mentioned before, if you guys haven't tried using a board to do like a look like this with, I highly, highly suggest it. It's so helpful. It's just having a harder surface to paint against, I feel like can make the blend so much better and so much more soft, as opposed to trying to paint like on your hand holding the foil. It's just not an even surface, and it's also difficult to get great saturation with that, I feel like. So I'm doing my last one under here. And this is the same exact thing again. And I'm going to assess how much hair is left out of these foils once I do this one and see if I do want to tip it out. Because again, this is an area that is helpful to do a decent amount of tipping out, just because, again, like when you pull hair over your shoulder and it's, you know, down, this area shows. This bottom part is what's pretty much the like top layer of that underneath section that's showing when it's just down, if that makes sense. Okay, so now I'm going to take a look at how much hair is left out in between these foils. And it's a decent amount here. This is all the hair that's left out in between those back sections. So I am going to tip this out because that'll show, especially with like mid-length hair like she has. There's not a lot of, it's just, there's not a lot of like bulk on the super long ends to blend this in. So I want to make sure that this doesn't look too stripey and highlighty. So I'm going to go ahead and weave this. And back comb it. And then I'm going to do my tip out on there.
Carly, there is another question in the chat box. There's actually two of them. The first one is, did you make your own board?
I didn't. This one I purchased from a hairstylist. Her name is Ashley Norman Hair. You guys have probably heard of her. She sells them on her website. They're great. A bunch of people have them though, honestly. These are the ones I like. This is a plexiglass one. The dimensions are 5 by 11, I believe, and it's an 1/8 of an inch thick. You could make this probably very easily. It's just like a piece of acrylic, but she sells them, and she has like neon ones above. I don't think she has those clear ones anymore, but that's a great resource to find them.
Then the next question is, would you avoid teasing the hair if somebody had previous blonde on the hair?
I wouldn't necessarily avoid teasing it. Certain textures I would avoid teasing. The previous blonde doesn't really make me nervous. It's more like those clients that have really, really, really fine hair that is long, and I call it Velcro hair, where it's just like literally you put a dot of water on it, you do anything to it, and it just gets completely just like tangled. Nothing you can do will prevent that. Textures like that, I would more do like an air touch technique, which I love doing that as well. Like you guys probably have heard of Danilo Bozic. He's amazing. I feel like he's the most well-known for air touch. He does it a lot with highlights, but I would do exactly this. I'll show you guys. Take a section, weave it, and then if I had a blow dryer here, I would just put my blow dryer on top of the section and blow out some of those shorter hairs, which is essentially what you're doing when you're teasing, when you're back combing. You're like combing back some of those short hairs. So if somebody has texture like that, I would absolutely do air touch instead of back combing. Certain textures of hair are really easy to get the back combing out of, and some people like back combing because they feel like it's a lot quicker. I'd say do both though, or alternate. If you try them both out and see what you think. I think you can get an extremely similar result with air touch or with the teasing, for sure. Okay,
It's
so
funny because they all got to do, a lot of the people on this got to do Daniela back in February, so that's
there
pretty
you
cool.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you guys know what he's all about. He's amazing, but I kind of have taken a couple classes from him and other people that do the technique, and I've just adapted it to do more of a lived-in thing. So same thing, I just don't paint the lightener up as high. Okay, so now let's move on to the side. So just as a point of reference, here's the front of her head, right? So as I discussed, if she was a client, I would have clipped all this back up so she's not like, suffocating from these foils. So there's the front of her head. Now I'm moving to the side of her head. So here's the side, front right here. Here's the back foils that I just did. I know it's kind of like hard to follow sometimes if you're not in person seeing exactly what's going on. So I am going to let's do 4 foils up the side of her head, and they're all going to be diagonal back sections. You're probably thinking like, what the hell, are you a psycho? 4 foils isn't going to do anything. But I'm telling you guys, this is where the efficiency comes into play. You don't have to spend 20 hours foiling this. So just have an open mind. Let me show you what 4 foils up the side of the head plus tipping out looks like. So my first section is going to be right here. I'm going to leave out all this hair underneath. This is a big section. This is like a 2-inch wide section, probably more than that. So I'm going to do the same exact thing that I've been doing, just on a diagonal back over here on the side. And on these side sections, when I'm taking a section, I pretty much will do a little scoop. So it's basically like a little half moon shape here. And I'm picking up more hair in the middle of my section, less hair on the outer corners. This is basically to just have it look really soft and blended on those outer corners so nothing looks chunky, but still pick up a decent amount of hair in the middle there. So again, you can kind of see on that parting line. It's a little bit hard to see, but essentially it's like a half moon shape like that. Now I'm going to do my weave and my back comb, and these are like medium weaves again. If you're working on somebody with really, really dark hair and they want to be really light, I suggest doing medium to even fine weaves just so it blends. If you are working on like a level 8 and they want to be really blonde, do these weaves heavier. Otherwise, if you do fine weaves or even medium weaves, they're totally going to get lost in the hair. So you can see my weave size there. I'd call it a medium weave. I'm going to paint my lightener on now in a diagonal back angle. So I'm essentially mimicking the angle of my section that I just took. This is going to create that look of like blonder up towards the face and then darker as you get back towards here. Like a teardrop effect, kind of like a dark halo back there in the back of their head. So same exact thing that I did before. I'm going to place another foil on top of that one so that I don't have to like crinkle everything up and get it so uneven. I feel like sometimes that causes uneven lift. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this foil up that I just did, and I'm going to do 1 to 2 tip outs in this hair that's left out underneath. Again, if I just left this and she was all dark like this, yeah, it would look like a big black hole, and I don't really want that. I do want her to appear lighter. So I'm going to split this one into 2 since this is a pretty big section. Split this into 2, and I'm going to weave a little bit. And then I'm going to back comb. And so I'm left with this like small, fine little piece. And that's going to go in a foil, and that's going to help to make her ends all look bright by still leaving dimension like internally. So again, I'm not painting up too high. I really don't go past the mids in something like this. And if they have really long hair, you even want to paint like less high up. I mean, she kind of has a lob, so I just feel like I want to paint kind of halfway up her hair, if that even. But on somebody with long hair, you really don't need to do all that. The other thing I want to mention is you guys probably noticed I like really didn't section anything out before I started, which I know some of you guys are probably cringing. I totally get that, and you want to see it sectioned before. The reason I don't is just, again, my whole philosophy, like with less is more and efficiency is everything. To me, why? Like, I don't really need to. I know I'm going to do foils up the side and I'm going to do them in the back. I'm not doing this like elaborate sectioning pattern. It just doesn't flow to me, but you could certainly section this if you wanted. And the only things I would section would be 2 sections, start from like crown, back of the crown to behind their ear, and have 1 front section on either side and then your back section. And that's how I would section. All right, so I got my tip out in there, tip outs in there, got my first diagonal back foil. Now I'm going to move on and go 1 more above that and do the same exact thing with the tipping out. I'm going to blend her down a little bit so you guys can see. Okay, so I did my first diagonal back foil here. I'm going to do another diagonal back foil about 1 inch above that. Okay, and then I'm going to do my scoop section again. And on this one, I'll show you guys how I would incorporate lowlights into this if I were doing lowlights. And lowlights would be helpful if somebody came in, they've been highlighted forever, they have a really grown out highlight, or they've been doing this forever and they want to go a little bit more dimensional, something like that. I would say lowlights can come in super handy with something like that, because sometimes you do need to add dimension back in. It's not always like, you know, people with virgin hair coming in and they already have tons of dimension to work with. So if somebody came in and was really, really blonde and needed dimension added back in, I would probably do these still even 2 to 4 teasy lights on either side. If they're already really blonde, I mean, you don't need to add a ton of these teasy lights. You can just do like 2 to 4 and make it so it's blonde again in those power areas, like right up around their hairline, around their part where it shows, and then do a ton of low lighting. Okay, so got this foil in. So again, this is where I'm going to show you if somebody had low lights. So I'm going to lift this up. If she was already really blonde and needed low lights added in, I would take this section of hair right here that's in between these 2 foils I did. I would weave and I would put a foil in here, and then I would paint a low light down on this hair. You could leave the ends out a little bit. Typically, I like to leave the blonde ends out a little bit and just do my low light in that roots and midsection, but you could switch that up. Like, you might need to pull it all the way through if they're so saturated. But in this situation, I am going to tip this out. So let me take this section. See how thick that section is? I still think if I weave and backcomb it though, this can easily be 1 tip out. The thing to keep in mind is like it's really easy to get carried away with this and you're just like tipping out every single hair on the head. It's not necessary. Like, you still want to have dimension. And like I said, I usually work in sessions with people. I will not put every single end of your hair in a foil on session 1. I just feel like it looks so much more natural and dimensional if you do this process over time. But that's personal preference, and I discuss that with my clients. You certainly could tip out every single hair that's left out of a foil and get a really light situation. So
we have a great question too. How often are your guests getting their highlights refreshed with this technique?
Great question. So this full thing with the tip outs, I mean, honestly, not really more than the first time I see them when we're like if we're starting from dark hair. On occasion, I'll do some tipping out if they're already blonde, and I'll do that with like a much lower volume lightener, or I'll do it with some wet balayage. But typically I'll see them for the service and then I'll see them 3 months later. Like 8 to 12 weeks later is typically about what I do. And when they come in for a maintenance, I'm usually going to do a partial. So that would include maybe 2 foils on either side on the top here, their money piece, and then maybe like 1 or 2 foils in the crown area. So it's not like, you definitely see them less frequently. Which is could adjust your pricing. Keep that in mind. You're not going to see these people every 6 weeks. There's really no point. But like I said, as far as the tipping out, I would do that just much, much less frequently. It's just not necessary. If they're already blonde in the ends, you've already accomplished the goal. But sometimes blondes need like refreshing. We know that. Sometimes they just get yellow, dull, kind of blah looking. So in a case like that, what I would do is either do the same technique with the tipping out, but I would use maybe like I probably wouldn't use Blonde Me if they're already blonde. I'd probably use maybe Vario Blonde, and just do it with a really, really low volume lightener, a really low volume developer, sorry, in the foils. So this is my third foil on this side. And again, I'm painting the lightener on in a diagonal back so you can see the lightener's going to go on like that. Higher up towards the face, lower towards the back. And just saturating it a ton. If you have somebody who has really, really long hair, I highly recommend either getting a roll of foil that you can cut to the size you want, or putting two foils together, like putting another foil down here and then painting on it. Because I find that there's a lot of inconsistencies if you're like balling up a ton of hair inside each foil. So definitely stretch the hair out and get it as flat as possible while painting and while processing. So again, same thing. I flip that foil up. I'm going to do my tip out right here. And I'm going to weave it. If somebody has really fine hair too, you might not even have to weave. You could just take that whole section and just backcomb it, and you'll still be left with something really tiny and fine. And adversely, if you have somebody who has really, really thick hair, you might need to do like 2 of these in between every foil because they just have so much hair it won't fit in one foil. I would say if somebody has virgin hair and you're really going for that like really light kind of sun-kissed, really like light end look, I would do this in between every single foil if they're all virgin. If you want something with a little bit more dimension and you're not going for like the all over blonde ends, I would say do every foil or every other foil in the front, and then in the back maybe do in between every other foil or every 3 foils. Okay, so now I'm at my last section here on the top of her head. Let me spin around so again you can get like another point of reference because it gets confusing. So this is the front of her head. There she is. Hello, lady. And I have done, I'm going to take her off so you guys can see. On this side over here, I've done my 3 diagonal back foils. I did a tip out in between each of them. And now I'm at her part. Ooh, where are we? There's her part. And I have this section of hair left right here. I am going to do, technically it's like a horizontal foil since it's right over her part. But I'm going to paint the lightener on in a diagonal back just because I want it to mimic the rest of the hair and the rest of what I'm doing. I'm going to lower this down a little bit. Okay.
Hi, Carly. So there is actually a comment or a question, and I know that you have this, but the comment or question is, do you have the pre-done mannequin to show what this is going to look like at the end? And
yes.
Yeah, and they can just stay tuned. So
I do. I'll show that in just a second. Let me finish this one. I should have shown you guys at the beginning.
Oh, it's all good.
So yeah, I'll finish this side and then I'll show you guys that for sure. So again, this is the top of her head. There's her part right there. So like I said, if she had a straight, or I'm sorry, if she had a side part, I would do this exact same thing I'm doing. I would just do it off her side part. And with that being said, you'd probably need 1 extra foil on the heavier side of the part. So like maybe you do 4 foils on the side of the part that has less hair, and then on the side of the part that has more hair, you might do 5 foils. But I'd do the same exact thing. It wouldn't really change much at all. So again, there's my foil. It's right on her part. And I am just painting that lightener on. And then I'm going to do the same thing underneath this foil. I'm going to lift it up and paint my tip out on. And like I was going to mention to you guys, the reason I wanted to do this on a mannequin was so that I could show you exactly how I gloss it. Like after I finish doing the foiling, I have one that's pre-done that has not been glossed, like she's been lifted, but I do want to take you through the whole service of like how I root melt and gloss it, because I feel like that's a really important part of this too. Okay, so now I'm going to take this last little section left in between those two foils, and this section is pretty small. Let me see if you can see it. You can see it's like pretty fine. So I'm not going to weave that, because if I did, there'd be like no hair left to tease. So I'm just going to do a couple back combs, make it pretty fine, and then paint this stuff. And then I'll show the after. But I also plan on finishing this exact one and sending Amber photos. I'll also post it on my page too. But you guys can get kind of an idea. Okay, so now I've gotten one side of her head completely foiled. At this point, I would be checking in on those front pieces of hair that I lightened in the very beginning, just checking to see that nothing's breaking, making sure everything's good. If something was done processing, I would just pull the foil out. Like these little baby ones up here, I would just be checking those. I mean, for her, she's a doll head, so we're good with the timing. Let me show you guys this after one. I actually left her hair straight, and now I'm kind of regretting it because it's a little bit hard to see on here, but you kind of get the idea. I mean, she's pretty light coming from being all dark, and it's just like really soft and blended up there at the top, and that I think comes a lot from the root melt, but she's got a lot of brightness. You can see like how most of her ends down there are pretty much all light. So hopefully that helps to give, hopefully that helps to kind of give a visual of like what I'm going for in the end result with this. Really bright money piece, and then really blended there through the top part. Okay, so in an interest of not just absolutely boring you guys, I would do the same exact thing on the other side of her head. Literally a mirror effect. It would look exactly the same. I'm not going to do that because I think I want to be respectful of your guys' time, and I want to make sure I have plenty of time to show the root melting and glossing technique as well. So again, same exact thing over here on the other side of her head. Nothing would change. I would do those 4 teasies, diagonal back sections, and then I would do the tip outs in between every foil. So hopefully everybody's good with that. I just feel like it's, you know, we have 2 hours, so I want to make the most of that and not just make you guys watch the exact same thing again. So I'm just going to section out this side that I am not going to be doing because, again, no point. It's extremely repetitive, but I will finish it after the class and show the whole end result. Okay, so let me give you guys another point of reference here to know where I'm at on the head. Uh-oh. Okay, so here's the front of her head. She's under there. Okay, and here's the side that I just did. Here's the side that I would do if I was in the salon with the real client. And then I'm spinning her all the way around to the back, and here's the back section. So here's those foils, the 1 tip out and the 2 foils on either side of her hairline that I did earlier. And here's her back section. So this is where I spend the least amount of time. Not because I'm lazy, not because I'm trying to hurry up and get through to the next client, but simply because, in my opinion, there's no point to spend an hour of your time back here getting all this blonde. She's not going to see it. I mean, there are those few crazy clients that will like go home and look in the mirror, like lift up every hair. majority of people, if you explain to them like, okay, we're going for a dimensional look, if that's what you want, there doesn't need to be lightness in every single spot. And this is a question I also get to. Well, what if my client wants to wear their hair half up? Okay, well then you explain to them, great, that's fine. And I can put a lot of blonde under there, but this dimensional look that you want doesn't exist if there's too much blonde under there. One of my favorite little quotes, and if you guys have taken a class from me before, you probably have heard me say it, is to highlight everything is to highlight nothing. If you have highlights everywhere, nothing looks that blonde because it has nothing to pop against. So, I mean, I don't know, tell your clients that if they're concerned about wearing their hair half up, half down. It's like, well, okay, yeah, I could put a ton under there, but where's all the darkness, all this dimension that you want to see? Where's that going to come from then? So this is where I leave that dimension to create a very dimensional look. Is underneath back here is where a lot of it exists. Hopefully that made sense. So we'll start by taking a pretty big section here underneath by leaving a pretty big section. So I'm going to take this whole thing here and I'm going to start by just separating out. Let me get her just nice and straight there. Okay, I'm going to separate out like this whole triangle back here. Sorry, friends. 1 second. Let me fix her. Okay, so I left out this whole triangle. This is like a really big section. This is like probably 3 inches wide. Like that's 3 inches. And you might be panicked if in the salon you're like, oh my God, I cannot leave out that much hair. Okay, I'm telling you though, this dark stuff is for one going to pop against these foils underneath here that I did to create a bright hairline. And these bright pieces I'm going to put on it are going to pop against it. Plus I'm going to tip this out. So the darkness is really only going to exist here in this like little quadrant. So I'm going to do the same exact thing here. I'm going to do a diagonal, a horizontal foil back here. I'm going to paint the lightener on kind of in a V shape though, to mimic that look that I'm creating everywhere else, of the lighter in the front and the darker towards the back. So I've got my section. I'm going to weave it and back comb it. And she's got pretty short hair, so you need to be mindful of like still leaving a little bit of root just so that it matches the rest. On long hair, you really don't have to think about that as much just because there's so much hair to paint and whatnot. So just keep that in mind with shorter hair, lobs, bobs, stuff like that. So I'm going in with my lightener, mostly on the ends. And then up here, you can see I'm painting like the lightener on in a V. So higher on either side, lower down there in the middle. And I'm just using my brush to feather it. Okay. Put another foil on there. It's short enough, I probably could have folded up that foil. But again, if you have long hair, definitely recommend putting 2 foils back on top of each other. Okay, now I've got this hair left out in that little triangle shape there. I'm going to tip some of this out so that it's not like a black hole. But again, I do want to leave a lot of dimension in there. With short hair, you just have to be careful about tipping out because, again, there's not that much hair. And if you go too high up, it just looks like a really random, like grown out blonde piece. So I got my little tip out section there. I'm going to use a little bit smaller foil for this. I'm alternating between smaller foils and bigger foils, and longer foils, I should say, just based on like how long the hair is and the section that I'm painting. So you can see like I left all that root out because again, on this short hair, if I brought that lightener up Any higher, it would look a little funky and there wouldn't be like any dark root left in that. So you can see I have a little bit more left in this section. I'm not going to tip that out because she's got a lot of brightness around here. And I got this bright tip out here. And like I said, just like be super mindful of leaving dimension. It's so easy to overfoil and get really carried away, but I really encourage you to just be mindful of it. Make a commitment to yourself to not just like foil every single hair on the head, because it really will take away all the dimension. Now I'm going to move to doing a diagonal section here. It's like a V section. And as I'm doing this one in a V versus horizontal and just painting in a V, just because the head gets a little bit wider as you go up in this back section. And I find that it's a little bit easier to kind of separate that into two foils as the head gets wider. So I'm going to do one foil here and one foil here. And these, I'm going to paint the lightener on both in the diagonal back section to mimic that V that I created. I know a question that might come up is, could you do this whole technique with slices? Yeah, you totally could. You could alternate. You could do slices and weaves. You could do weaves in the back, slices in the front. It's so versatile. You can totally change it up. You can also totally switch up the amount of foils. If you have somebody that wants a really, really, really blonde look and they don't want to see a lot of dimension, but they do want to be lived in, you could do this exact same thing and do 6 to 8 foils on either side. Do 8 foils in the back here. Like I said, I'm much more like minimal when I do this, and I'm usually like the kind of clients I attract are typically people that want to see a lot of dimension, because that's what I do most of, and that's what I'm posting, and that's what I'm getting. So you know, but you could this is really versatile. You could do a ton of foils and get it way blonder. You could do 2 foils on either side and get it way less blonde. So it depends. I'm also open if you guys have any questions about anything else like social media, all that kind of stuff. Feel free to ask me questions about that too. I'm always happy to help with that stuff.
There is a question about the area that you're in right now. There's a question that says, is there any way to make the hair still look dimensional when half up?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think doing exactly this would make it remain dimensional. So like, I think that's what she's asking. Like, would it be dimensional if it's half up like this? And yes, it totally would be, for sure, by doing this. I more was referring to the people that are like, oh, I want to wear my hair half up, half down, but like it's dark at the roots up there. And that's where I come in and I'm like, okay, well, I can add a lot more lightness at your roots, but then you lose all the dimension, you know, throughout. So yeah, I was more saying, sorry, and that might have been kind of unclear. I was more saying, if somebody is insistent on having light pieces coming from like up here in the back, that's a situation where you're kind of like, okay, well, can't really have both. You know, you can either be dimensional or have light pieces all the way from your roots and be solid back there. But I would say, yeah, this is totally dimensional if they wear it half up, half down. And you'll see all this stuff if it's half up, half down. It just won't be coming right from their roots. And typically it's not as much lightness as it is in the front. So I'm doing those same 2 little tip outs underneath here. And just feathering up. And I think that a lot of times there's a couple reasons why if you do tip outs, they don't blend and they end up looking like a line. Like you can see that line of demarcation when you're all done. One of them, I think, is you take too big of sections. The sections have to be fine because of the things I mentioned before. There's no heat from the scalp helping, and there's no way to root melt these. So they really have to be kept fine. The other thing I think is you're doing way too many. The point of tip outs is to, yes, brighten the ends, but leave some dimension in there still so that there is not a harsh line of demarcation. So if you do tip outs and you're like, rinse it and you notice that it is just solidly, you can see that line of demarcation where you started those tip outs, I would say take finer sections, do less, because you need that hair that's not painted to blend the line of demarcation for you. Okay. So now I am moving up to this crown area. These are my last couple sections of her head. So I am going to do 2 horizontal foils here in her crown area. I'm doing horizontal foils because if you think about the placement of foils, typically you can expect to have more dimensions show when foils are diagonal back, simply because you think about how a diagonal back foil lays. That dimension just has way more space to pop in and pop through. When you think of horizontal foils, they essentially lay right on top of each other. So much less dimension is obvious. The reason I'm doing that, I still want it to be dimensional, of course, but in this back crown area is one of those areas where it's going to show a lot. So I just want to make sure I stack enough in there so that my client feels blonde enough, but still has dimension. So I'm going to split this little back triangle, and you can see I have like a little triangle left. I don't know how well you guys can see that, but hopefully decently well. I have like a little triangle right in her crown area left. I'm going to split it into 2 like that. And then I'm just going to do my 2 horizontal foils and back comb in between like I've been doing the whole time. So this technique is kind of repetitive, but that's kind of the beauty of it too. It's just not like you have to think a ton and just be like, you know, overthinking this process. Like I said in the beginning, I really think as hairstylists, we just overthink so much stuff. We make it so complicated on ourselves, way too challenging. Just keep it simple. Like there's no need to just overthink this. But I think it does happen occasionally. But this to me is a really simple technique that does keep it pretty simple. Okay, and
So there's a great question here that asks, how long does it take you to do this whole technique? I think that's an amazing question.
Love that question. So it takes me about an hour to put this in the salon. And you can see even now, I mean, I'm about at an hour and 15 minutes, but, and I skipped one side, but without talking, if I was just going right through this, it would probably take me an hour to put these foils in. Full from like start to finish, I would say 2.5 to 3 hours. So after she processes, I rinse her out, I get her brushed out and prepped, and then I go ahead and I do my root melts and my gloss. And I do that at the same time. That whole process takes me about 30 minutes total. And after that, I just blow dry her. So total, I would say 2.5 to 3 hours. If somebody has a ton of hair, you could potentially spend 3.5 hours doing this. But again, it's really just about being mindful and just keeping track of where you want to go in, having a good game plan, and keeping in mind where you want to spend the most time foiling. Like you could see in this back section how fast you could just get through this. Obviously, again, I'm talking and explaining, but this could go quick. Usually I'm spending maybe 15 minutes in the back. And again, it's not because I'm lazy, like, or want to rush to the next client or anything like that. It's just that why? Like, why waste my time back there? And the client's never going to see it. And it's not working towards the end result, which is a dimensional blonde with dimension. Like, you got to leave that dimension somewhere if the client truly wants to see dimension. Okay, now I'm in my last foil up here. I'm going to do one more horizontal foil. Same thing, paint the lightener on in a V. I'll do my one tip out underneath.
While you're doing that last section, a quick question I thought of. If you're charging for this, do you charge like a balayage price? Do you charge foiling price? Like how, do you have a term for what this technique is that you call it in the salon?
Great question. So I do my pricing just really simply. I don't like to give all these like specific names for stuff because I think clients get very confused and overwhelmed. And I also think that there's just like some stuff they don't exactly need to know every little detail of. So I basically price my services as like specialty blonding, a full head or a partial head of specialty blonding. But I don't break it down to like balayage, foliage, root melt, da da da. So this service would include a root melt, a gloss, any other glosses that like need to happen. So yes, I would consider this a full specialty blonding. And with that being said, I would charge more than I charge for like a traditional highlight. This is way more involved. It's a way more specialty service. It involves way more processes. And also the client's not going to come see you as much. So keep that in mind. If your highlight clients are coming every, say 6 to 8 weeks, maybe, these clients are coming more like every 8 to 12, even to like 16 weeks. So you want to make sure that you are charging accordingly. One, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of processes, and it really is something like specialty. So hopefully that answered that enough.
No, I love the term specialty blonde because I think that a lot of times people put balayage or highlight, they don't think of anything in between. So I love specialty blonde because this is really what this is. So
Totally.
thank you.
Yeah, and I think so too because, a client comes in and a lot of times they're like, well, I want balayage. And it's like, well, no, you actually don't. Based on the photos you're showing me, like, you really don't want balayage. So this is an option that, like, maybe a lot of times I'll do highlighting on someone's head and then I'll do TZ lights underneath. So I combine a bunch of techniques. And in that case, clients get very, like, confused, like, well, what do you mean you said it was TZ light? Like, they don't need to know all that stuff. So I think it's just better keep it at specialty blonding. It's specialized, and that's what it is.
No, I love that because it makes it a little bit easier. It's like specialty, so I'm going to do my own special thing to make you the blonde that you want. That's perfect. I love that.
Exactly. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into like my root shadowing techniques and stuff, and how I consider, like, the lightning is a big part of the service, but honestly, I think the bigger part is this next section that I want to show you. So I have this lovely gal that I have lightened, but she really hasn't been melted or glossed. So it's kind of hard to see her line of demarcation on there. You can kind of see it a little bit, but it doesn't really matter if you can see it or not. You'll still be able to totally get the technique in what I'm doing. I'm going to dampen her hair with a spray bottle. In the salon, she would be wet with with just like from washing her hair. So obviously I'm not going to take the time and go rinse her out of it. So she's getting sprayed with a spray bottle. I always do this on damp hair. And I'm going to go into some of my like best tips for glossing and toning, because I feel like this part can throw people off a lot. But I truly feel like if you can get down this like glossing and toning and how to do this, it will change your whole service. This brings the entire thing together at the end. I mean, I'm decent at blending lighter into foil, but I can't blend it to be seamless. There are plenty of people that can. If you guys follow like Liz Haven, she does these like beautiful blends. A lot of times she doesn't root melt, she doesn't shadow, but in some instances, if somebody's wanting a really dramatic like root and then really dramatic light ends, it's really, really hard to be able to get them where you want without root melting and glossing. So this to me is a really crucial part of the service. So I'm going to use on her today, I'm going to use Agora Vibrance 4-0 and 6-stroke 1-2. So let me explain why I'm using that formula and how I got there. So let's start with the level I pick. I always root melt and gloss with the same level as their natural. Reason being, the point of this is to completely erase a line of demarcation so that it's really soft and seamless from roots to ends. This is not going to be a look that people want when there's like a harsh line of demarcation here and you can see where the darkness starts and the light begins. All these looks, if you guys notice, they're extremely, extremely blended from roots to ends. Again, part of that happens with blending in the foil. A lot of it just happens with the root melt and gloss. Like, I'm just going to say, if I blow dried somebody's hair, just their raw lift with no blending, they would not be happy. And I mean, I've been doing the same exact thing for a long time. So if you rinse the foils and you're like, ooh, that's a harsh line, that's okay. Like, it's really hard to blend it well enough in a foil so that you wouldn't feel the need to root melt and gloss. So I've gotten her brush towel. So again, I'm using 4-0 and 6-1-2. Her natural base is like her natural base is probably a level 5, I would say. 4 or 5, something like that. So the 4-0 and the 6-1-2 are basically going to get me to a 5. The 6-1-2 is pretty cool. So that's it's gonna appear a bit cooler, which I'm okay with. I'm sorry, it's gonna appear a bit darker, which I'm okay with. Like, I don't need, I would rather it be a little bit darker and blend that line than too light, and then you get back to the bowl and you're like, oh my God, like I can totally still see the line of demarcation. It doesn't look blended. I've done that so many times, especially like not just vibrance. I mean, usually all colors just process and they look scary dark. So you know that thing where you put it on and you see it processing and you're like, oh my God, it's black. I need to remove it immediately. You take it off and then you go back to the bowl, or you go back to blow dry and you're like, wow, okay, well that did absolutely nothing. It was a complete waste of my time. So I really encourage you guys to pick a level that's dark enough, let it sit on there, and don't get too terrified when it looks dark. It's okay. You want it to erase that line of demarcation. You completely want it to get rid of that line so that it doesn't show. So again, I'm doing 4-0 and 6-1-2 equal parts. I picked this formula because likely with how dark she is, and this would happen in the real salon life too, right? She's like a level 4. You might not be able to get all those pieces to like a level 8 or level 9 like she wants. So I would definitely explain that in the consult, like we're going to be dealing with warmth today. And then to neutralize and eliminate some of that warmth up at her base, where it lifts warm, that's why I'm going to use the 6-1-2. 6-1-2 is cool. The 4-0 is just like a nice rich color to bring it down a couple levels. I love combining a warm and a cool tone for a really well-balanced result. If I just put 6-1-2 on some of her like orangey pieces, there might be some pieces though that have lifted cooler, and the 6-1-2 is just going to make it look hollow and not super rich. So I love combining a stroke 0 and like something cool, even something warm. If somebody lifts pretty warm or lifts pretty light and they're pretty cool, I'll mix like some gold in there too in their root melt formula. I love doing that. Okay, so I mix again 4-0, 6-1-2, equal parts of that, and then I use 6 volume lotion activator. I like using the lotion on root melts because the consistency is just thicker. It's not like as drippy, which I like. Get that all mixed up. Okay. So I'm gonna start. Flip her around here. Let me get my comb. I'm going to start in the back. I like to start in the back when I'm root melting because, again, that's going to sit on the longest. So if it's a little bit darker back there, I really don't care usually. And people's hair is usually a little bit darker in the back of their head anyway. I'm literally sectioning out just 2 front sections. Spray her a little bit more. Damp hair is one of the keys to this, I feel like, to avoid getting splotchiness or having it be uneven. You don't want it soaking wet to where it's like dripping everywhere, but damp, like towel dried hair is what I usually do this on. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind is really get their hair brushed out well. Doing this on tangly, knotty hair is just really tough. It leads to a lot of splotchiness because when you're combing it through, if you're hitting a tangle every single time, it's gonna cause a mark of that color to transfer onto the blonde. Okay, so I've gotten her kind of all brushed out. I'm gonna start back here in the back, and I'm literally just painting on this root melt color, and I'm dragging it down right past where the line of demarcation is, right past where that blonde starts. Again, it's kind of hard for you guys to see on dark hair and virtually, but on a real person in the sun, you can kind of see where those light pieces begin. And I'm just like, this is so not super technical. I just paint it on, take down one section, and then paint on the top of the section. This is one of those things I really encourage you to not overthink it. It's like extremely easy to get caught up in like, oh my God, that piece isn't blended enough. I need to go back and comb it 7 more times. I think that's one of the things that causes a lot of splotchiness and color to transfer is you're just like too obsessed with making sure it's combed out. I basically put the color on. I take this wide tooth comb and I comb it down like that, like 3 times, and then I'm not touching that root again. Like it's just staying there. You can see, I'll push it back here and do the same thing. I'm not really dragging it all the way through the ends. I'm basically just going like that and scooping it out before I get to the ends. Don't overthink it. This process, I feel like, really gets people in their head and they get really nervous about it, but it's really like, don't make it so crazy. It's just like a really simple process. Same thing back here. You could do this on a diagonal if it makes you feel a little bit more comfortable. Like take diagonal sections like this and go through the head. For me, just like ergonomically, how my hand goes, this makes more sense to me and this feels easier. But you could really do either way. Okay, so I'm just moving up the back of the head here. Again, dragging past the line of demarcation. If you don't get this past where that lightener starts, it's doing absolutely nothing for you. It's completely wasting your time. So get it past that line of demarcation. I promise you, it looks terrifying. This is what's going to give you like that really soft, seamless blend.
Quick question in the comments. How long do you normally tone for?
So I leave the root melt on the entire 20 minutes every time on every single person. I used to not do that, and I'd leave it for like 7 minutes, whatever. But again, I ran into that issue all the time of like, I'd get back to the chair and it'd be like dark and you could see the line of demarcation. So now I leave it on for the full 20 minutes every time, and it looks black every time it's processing. It's just like part of my life now. So don't panic about that. That totally happens. It's normal. But I say leave it on. Do yourself a favor. Like don't rinse it off too quick. That's one of the biggest issues. And the other question I also get often is do you ever worry about a dark color like this transferring on the blonde? I never do, and I never have that issue. I have done this literally with a level 3 on the roots and a level like 8, 9 on the ends. Like I said, I think having the root melt on and the gloss on at the same time and combing them through, which I'm going to show you guys how I do as soon as I put the mids and ends gloss on, is what makes it look seamless and is what makes it look really blended. So no, I don't worry about it. I never really have that issue. I think if your application is precise, you don't really need to worry about that a ton. Over here on the sides, I'm basically pulling each section back away from the face and applying this in a vertical sections. I find this way is easier on the sides than horizontal because you're dealing with our ear in there and you have to like paint down over it. Also, if you're not working with an assistant, I think this is just a way easier way to do it because you don't have to like flip hair back and it doesn't, the light ends don't get on the darkness on the other side of the head. So to me, this is the easiest way. So I'm just painting this up. I am going to leave out the money piece. I'm going to do that last. If you had a money piece that you wanted to really leave a lot lighter at the roots, absolutely mix up. You could mix up a new formula. You could add clear to this formula. I do it with the same formula that I do on the back always because I like that depth and dimension up there at the roots, but you could totally switch that up. So I've left out her money piece right there. I'm going to do that last. I'm going to do the same exact thing over here, painting on this root mount on this side of her head. Let me bring this over here. Okay.
All right, I just got another great question. The question is Carly using this technique on any of her gray hair clients that have a base color applied first, or is this just for virgin hair clients, not for white hair?
Love that question. Great question. I would do this on anybody that I did like teased foils on, even if I did their gray coverage like separate. I don't think the gray coverage would help to blend these foils, so I would still do this. But a great option, which is one of my favorite things to do, if somebody is open to blending their gray, like they have just a little bit of gray, they don't really want to commit to a like really high maintenance color appointment with just, permanent color that grows in and they have to come in every 4 weeks, an awesome option is to do exactly this, but use 13 volume with your Vibrance and get really good gray blending. Like, I think that Vibrance blends gray incredibly well. So I love that option. But yes, I would, if I had done like a permanent base color on somebody, then done teasy lights, I would still do this process, because to me, this is the part that blends the teasy lights. That gray coverage really didn't blend it. But again, charge accordingly for that. I kind of have an hourly pricing structure. And if I'm doing like 5 processes, a root melt, gray coverage in between, like, I'm charging for all that. So make sure you're using, charge accordingly. If it takes you way longer, you need to be compensated for that for sure. Okay, so I've left out her money piece. I still do this at the same time that I am doing her gray, like that I'm doing her root melt, everywhere else. I just leave it out till the last, so that to be the last section, just so I can, maybe it's a little bit less coverage. And also it's just cleaner if this is the last stuff and everything else is kind of pushed back. So on this front stuff, I'm literally just like tapping this on. I'm not dragging it down super far. Then I'm using my comb and I am just gently combing through it, but nothing crazy. Same thing up here. I'm just tapping that on right there. And then I'm going to go to the other side and do the same exact thing. So just tap, tap, tap it on. Comb a little bit with your comb. And what just happened is exactly why you want to make sure that her hair is brushed out. You can see it my comb got caught like on a little tangle. So that would probably cause a little bit of a bleed mark, in which case it totally happens. I would spray it with a little bit of water, buff it out a little bit, or you could also just use a little bit of bleach if you do have a bleed mark. Tap a little bit of lightener on there and it's perfect. Okay, so this whole side's good to go. Let me finish up this side with her money piece tap.
So quick question, do you have any specific tools that you prefer for your root melt?
So I love this comb, which is like the funniest. It's called a Tangle Tamer comb. It's literally like $1 on Amazon or something, or like $5. I love it. I think, if you don't have that specific one, not a problem. I think though using a wider tooth comb is helpful, simply because you want a tool like a comb that's not moving too much product. Like if you use a fine tooth comb for this, way too much product's going to get spread down onto the mids and the ends of the hair. Like you want something that is blending the product but not moving it too much. So even a lot of people use a wet brush. I don't hate that idea, but to me, like a wider tooth something is more helpful. So I love that. I also use usually these like big brushes from Framar, just because they cover a lot of ground. But that's personal preference. I feel like brushes and stuff like that is so specific to the person and what they prefer. So it kind of depends. Okay, so I'm done with my root melt. Now I'm going to go on and do the mids and ends gloss. So let me set this down. And for my mids and ends gloss, I am going to use a combo of, let me spin this around. I don't know if you guys will be able to see it because it's like backwards too, but I know you have a banner with it, Amber. So it's TBH. It's 819, 1019, and 906. So the 819 is like that Cendré Violet, or the 19 is that Cendré Violet. So that's going to be really cool because again, she probably lifted really warm based on the doll head that I started with, or the client that I started with. This happens all the time with clients. And I'm actually going to put in some 906 with that. So yeah, you have that down there. So 906 is like a natural chocolate. So why am I putting warmth in there if she's already warm, you ask? Well, I have found, and this has taken me like a really long time to figure out. I have found that just putting like straight up ash on a client, even if they want to be really, really cool, it can tend to look like really hollow and just kind of muddy. It just doesn't look bright. Like it takes a lot of the brightness away. So by adding some warmth in there, you get that reflect of warmth. So we know that warm colors reflect light, cool colors absorb it. So you'll never have the same brightness from something really cool as you'll get from something that's really, really warm. I hope that makes sense. So I want to have the best of both worlds. I still want this to look really bright, but I also want to cool it down a bit. So I'm putting equal parts of each. So that means that there's going to be more of the cooler tone in this formula. So I'm putting equal parts of 1019, 819, and 906. So technically there's like 2 cooler colors to 1 warmer color. And then I'm going to use the tone softener with 6 volume. So it's basically 1 part color, 1 part tone softener, and 1 part of the developer. If you guys are not familiar with TBH, I love it for glossing because it feels incredibly conditioning on the hair. It's really, really like heavy kind of, and I mean that in a good way. It's very conditioning. It feels like conditioner on the hair pretty much. So I love it for that. It also, if you're not familiar with TBH, is a permanent color, but mixing it with tone softener, 1 part color, 1 part tone softener, and 1 part developer, makes it act as a demi-permanent color. So this is the tone softener, if you guys are not familiar with it. And I'm mixing over here in a bowl that you can't really see, but it's nothing that exciting about it. I'm just putting it all together in a bowl and mixing it up. Let me talk about the level that I selected as well. So I'm basically toning her with like a level 8-9 essentially. Now granted, is she going to lift to an 8-9 everywhere? It's questionable. There's probably going to be some pieces that are definitely an 8 and a few that are a 9. So we always are told gloss at the level that you lift to if you want to like truly have an effect on the hair and like neutralize any unwanted tones. That's all great, but like reality is that some clients would rather see a little bit of warmth left in their hair than be truly toned to an 8 and have this cool toned, like really truly cool ashy level 8 hair. So I always err on the side of glossing lighter, simply because I'd rather them feel brighter and not as cool and like toned down, than feeling like we blow dry and everything. Like, yes, it's truly a cool level 7, 8. Like they really wanted cool tones, but then they're like, wait, but it doesn't look bright. Like I feel dull. So that's my approach to the toning and the glossing. So there's nothing technical about how I apply this. Honestly, if I'm applying TBH, I'm usually using a bowl because of the consistency. But if I'm applying, say, Vibrance as a mids and ends gloss, I'm usually using it in a bottle, or a Blonde Me Tone I'm usually using in a bottle. The placement doesn't change at all. I'm literally taking big sections, just for lack of a better term, slathering it on there, kind of working it through with my fingers at that line of demarcation. But I get enough to go from roots to ends. And I take my comb again, and I just brush through from roots to ends. So if you're freaking out and you're like, oh my God, but all that 4-0 and 6-1-2 is getting on the ends, I'm telling you, it really doesn't. I really have not run into that much at all. And I really believe that combing through from roots to ends with both the mids and ends and the root melts on is what makes it seamless and makes it look like it flows from roots to ends. You can't see that line of demarcation. I encourage you to try it. If you panic and you're like, I always do the root melt first, let it process, then rinse, and then do the gloss, totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's like 30 extra minutes. And again, this is not because I'm lazy. I'm trying to like get people in and out. It's just, why? Like, I feel like this, helps it just blend well and you kill two birds with one stone. You don't have to come back and do two separate processes. I am leaving the money piece out until the last section just because, I want to have full control over how toned that gets. So I'm leaving that out till the end, but I'm putting this gloss everywhere else and just combing through like that. The other thing to keep in mind with TBH is it is a permanent color, right? So we can like shift it a bit with that tone softener, but the basis of this color is it is permanent. If you put this on, in my opinion, if you put this on someone's roots, even with the tone softener at a light level, you are possibly going to get some lift out of it and bump their base a little bit. I don't really run into that glossing with it from mids to ends. And you might like that. Maybe you want a tiny bump at the roots, but just keep that in mind. I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, you can get a bump with Vibrance as well because it's an alkaline color. I really don't run into that much. I know that like kind of freaks people out, but I really don't run into it much. But just keep that in mind. Like TBH is at its core a permanent color.
All right, so great point. And two things. First thing, I just want to remind anyone watching this that if you want to learn more about TBH, you can actually go to our YouTube channel. So we do actually now have a YouTube channel, and it's Schwarzkopf Professional USA, and we do have free hairstylist education classes on there. So you can go there and watch one just on TBH if you want to learn more. Then we also had a comment. Somebody asked, do you wash your comb in between or no? In between probably the root meld, I'm assuming, and the mids and ends.
Great question. And also real quick on your comment on YouTube, the Schwarzkopf Professional USA YouTube channel is incredible. Like you are way underselling it, Amber, because there is so much stuff on there. I was preparing for a class for my private education group that I have, and it was about Vibrance, and I just needed some like technical information because I use it every day, but I don't know. I just don't know a ton of the technical stuff about it, but it's insane. I watched this awesome like 45-minute free video on everything about TBH, going so in depth, about Vibrance, going so in depth about it. There's so many color like techniques on there. It's incredible. Back to the question though. Do I rinse the comb off? No, I don't. If it's like tons of color on it, I guess I would wipe it off. But essentially, I'm going to be touching both the formulas with it. So no, I don't really rinse it.
Okay, and you're right about the YouTube channel. There's so much on there. Like you're right. I was underselling it, but I just wanted you to know that if you do want to find out more information on TBH, I believe John David is the one that did the TBH class. I did the one for Agora Real. I believe it was Hillary that did the one for Agora Vibrance. So all of the REM team worked really hard to make sure that you guys had product knowledge classes on everything. So it's not just TBH, it's everything that we have to offer. There's a class for. We even have one for fiber clinics now. So definitely check it out if you haven't.
And the IGTV on just the Schwarzkopf USA Instagram is like also incredible. There are so many classes on there. I'm like blown away, and I've looked into plenty of other brands because same thing, like researching other brands to talk about when people have questions. I think Schwarzkopf has got everybody beat with the amount of free education they offer and just the amount of content you can find like on anything. It's awesome. It's pretty amazing, and it makes it easy if you're not super familiar with everything in the line, because Schwarzkopf is huge. I mean, there's so many different color lines. Like there's plenty that I've never even played with within, Schwarzkopf. There's just so much color to learn. So utilize those free things. They're amazing. Okay, so I'm just doing now just this money piece. I'm applying it the same exact way. Again, I usually do this last just simply because I want to have the most control over this, and I really want to watch it and be able to rinse this when it's ready. What I would do, I just kind of sped through that process just in, because we're doing a class and I don't want to have you guys sit here watching me watch her process for 10 minutes. I would put the root melt on. Then I would wait 10 minutes probably, give that root melt time to just do its thing. And then after 10 minutes of processing, I would put on this mids and ends gloss because I don't really have the mids and ends process usually for more than like 10, 12 minutes max. So I would have waited a little bit before I put this on, but I didn't want to just have you guys sit here and do that. So
there is another question that I have for you.
Cool.
The question has to do with the new Blonde Me toner. So the person asked, you ever do a color melt utilizing Blonde Me Granite, Milk Chocolate, Nougat, or Deep Chestnut?
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I actually have a video on the
Oh,
Short
yay.
Stuff IGTV about that. It's also on my page. I believe it's on my page, or it might just be on the Short Stuff Instagram. Yes, I did a whole melt with, I believe I used nougat. What was it? No, granite up here, granite and milk chocolate as a root melt, and then melting into like ice on the ends. Those are so awesome for glossing root melts. I love those. The only time I'd say that I wouldn't use that is if you have somebody that's like really, really dark naturally and they lifted, you know, as you would expect, like really warm, and you really want to have more control over the level that you're glossing with. In that case, I probably wouldn't use a Blonde Me toner. I would more stick to something where you can really control the level and like the pigments in that level. But they're so good for like if you watch that video on IGTV on Schwarzkopf, I used it basically over like chunky highlights on like a level 5, 6, and it was beautiful. It was perfect. So yes, I would totally do that. Great alternative.
Awesome. Well, they also had another question, same person. Pros and cons to you, and I'm going to say this as you personally in the salon. Do you feel that Vibrance or Blonde Me toners last longer?
Ooh, that's a great question. I would say, I'm going to say, like, if we're talking about toning blondes, I'm going to say probably you have a little bit more control over the tones with the Vibrance. And in that sense, I think that they last longer. Just because, like, again, if you put a super ashy toner on somebody, on a blonde, it's going to rinse out much faster than if you put some gold in there, you fill it with some stuff. So I would say generally rule of thumb probably Vibrance, but the Blonde Me toners do really well. As far as like the darker ones, the nougat and stuff, the chestnut, milk chocolate, those hold up really well, especially if you leave them for the full processing time. So I think, I mean, yeah, I would say that definitely, they both last well, but I think generally Vibrance lasts longer, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love it. And maybe it's that little bit of alkalinity that's in there. And again, it always depends on the porosity of the hair and how high the hair is lifted. All
Totally.
that.
Yeah. All that stuff goes into consideration for sure. Yeah. I'm totally open to more questions too. I just stopped. She's now going to process for like 10 minutes or in the salon. She can process for however long now. But if you guys had any more questions, I wanted to answer those for you, or any about this service or anything like that, please tell me.
Yeah, and I'm not seeing any questions in here, but I think it would be interesting for them to learn a little bit about you. So I've got two things. First of all, who does your hair and what is the technique for that? And then the next would be like how you got started on Instagram and how like you got to where you are. I think it'd be fun for them to learn about you.
Yeah, totally. So my hair is the same exact technique that I did here. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's okay. So I am the worst client ever. I literally want to color my hair like once a year. I hate sitting there for getting it colored. It's just like my worst nightmare. I cannot sit there and just be calm. I just hate it. So I literally have my assistant. I'm like once or twice a year, like please put in just 3 foils on either side and like 2 in the back. So it's literally, she just did it actually. So you can kind of see. So it's like a money piece. And then it's literally 2 diagonal back foils on either side. I have like, let me see if I can show you. Like I have a lot of dark under here because for one, I never want to do it. But for 2, I do like it being dimensional.
I just want to comment that when you lifted it up, for those of you that were asking about dimension underneath, I actually kind of like how deep it was under there. If you wore it half up, I feel like it actually looked really cool to have it that way.
I agree. That's my stance as well. And I think it all just comes down to educating your clients a little bit about that and just letting them know, like, hey, I'm not being lazy with this. I'm not just skipping out on foiling under there. It's like literally because it is true. If I had all that stuff under there highlighted, none of this would look as dimensional. But yeah, I have tons of dark under there. So you guys, that's probably a pretty good example. You guys can see like This is just remaining blonde over the times that I have gotten it colored. Just stays light on the ends, and then the internal part is dark. And this could be like a result of like a partial for somebody. Like that's literally what I got on my hair. So you could see kind of how that looks.
You know what your toner was that they used for you?
Yes, so we did on my roots, I used, I believe, 5.0 and 5.1 in Vibrance. I'm gonna say 5.0 and 5.1. And then because I like a natural level 5, probably 5.6-ish, even something like that. On the ends, we did 9-5.5, again, putting some lightness in there, and we did 9 I think we did 9-5.5 and 9.5.19. So like a 9 like the pastel vibrance options in 1.9. So again, something cool with something warm is my absolute favorite thing. And you can see the lighting's semi weird here, so I don't know if you can see, but it actually is really bright and it has a little bit of warmth to it. My hair is such that it does not like lightener. Like it doesn't do well with lightener. And I mean, I don't do it that much. I don't heat style it that much. Just some hair is not a friend of lightener. And that is my hair. So I can really speak with firsthand knowledge to clients about that because I put lightener on my hair and it just fries. Like it does not do well. I also have extremely coarse, thick hair naturally. And that kind of hair can also not look great with lightener on it. So I have a little bit of warmth in my hair. I like that. I don't mind it at all. And back to your original question, Amber, about Instagram. So a couple years ago, this was probably 2016, something like that. So it's been a couple years. I kind of was just like, I had a decent clientele. I have been doing hair now for 14 years. So I had a decent clientele built up. I wasn't like desperate for clients, but I kind of was like, you know what? I want to explore more into Instagram and make this more of like a profile that I'm actually like really using to get clients and to promote myself. Because when I first started doing hair, there was certainly no Instagram, which makes me feel so old. And when it first did start, it just wasn't as heavy. Like there were not many hairstylists on it. So just started kind of dabbling in that. I spoke with like a coach who he didn't do any of the work for me. He just kind of told me like where to direct my energy, what to spend time on my page, how to kind of utilize it. So I kind of got into that, started doing that. And more just over time, it was a very slow growth. So for those of you that are trying to grow your Instagram page and you're like, okay, I got 1 follower in 2 weeks, this sucks. Give it a minute because it takes time. I definitely did not wake up with multiple followers by any means. So just kind of started doing that more, learning what worked, what didn't. A couple years ago, I got into educating, and just a friend of mine who owns a salon was like, when are you going to come teach for my salon? And I'm like, teach what? Like, I don't know how to teach anything. And that was probably 4-ish years ago. And she was like, no, just come. Don't tell them you've never taught a class, but just show us what you do. And from there, I just realized, okay, I really love this. And then I started, focusing more on my Instagram on like education and the education side of stuff. And I started sharing formulas and sharing techniques and sharing placements and stuff like that. And it just kind of like snowballed a little bit, took off, or not snowballed. It was still slow, but then it started to take off. And now I've gotten to connect with awesome brands such as Schwarzkopf, just do a lot more education. It's been amazing, and I love using it for that. It's also great to get clients for sure, but the education part's really fun. It also allows me to connect with a ton of stylists that like I really would never meet otherwise, probably. So I don't know, it's been a cool journey, but it definitely has taken tons of time. And Instagram's always switching stuff up, so you got to like keep up with what they're doing. It's a full-time job. It's totally exhausting, but I encourage you to stick with it if you're like working on that.
No, I love that. And I noticed that a lot of your posts are very educational in the fact that there's like lines that show exactly where those foils were placed. Do you have a particular platform that you like to use to create those posts?
For sure. So those ones with the lines, I just make actually in iPhoto. Like I just do the markup feature on iPhoto and I draw lines in there. I actually have a video on my page about how to do that. but I use a lot of, now that reels are like really popular and videos, like all that stuff gets great traction and great engagement on your page as opposed to just photos, because the Instagram hair world is getting extremely saturated. And I mean that in a good way. There's so many talented hairstylists that now it's like you have to do something different than everybody's just doing. Like, you can't just post the back of the head anymore. I got to post so many other things. So videos and videos alone are a great way to do that. So I make those videos. I make all the videos like for reels and stuff like that in an app called Splice. I think it's much easier to use than the Reels platform. I think the Reels platform is like very challenging to use. So I use Splice, and then the lines are just in markup on iPhoto. So super simple and basic.
Awesome. I love that. Now, have you started getting into what everyone else is doing? TikTok? Are you making any of those at all?
I have made so I'm such a cheater. So I'll make a 30-second video in Splice and I'll use it as a reel. And then I'll go and I'll post on TikTok, because who has time to be making like 50 of these videos? So I have dabbled in it a little bit. I wouldn't say I'm like doing anything crazy over there. Some TikTok I haven't quite figured out yet. Like, some videos go crazy and they get like 40,000 views in like overnight, and then some get like 500 views. I think the audience on TikTok wants to see something a little bit different than like the Instagram audience that I have now gained. Just because now my Instagram page is so education heavy that people can plainly see who I'm trying to appeal to on my Instagram page. But TikTok, I don't know that it's the same. Like, I don't know that hairstylists are like going on there to learn techniques, or maybe I just haven't like tapped into that market yet, but it's definitely a little bit different. I'm still figuring it out, but I'm trying.
No, I totally get it. And I've been seeing a lot more hair videos on there, and I think a lot of them are befores and afters. So it's just interesting to find out, like, if somebody like you, a social media influencer, actually dabbled in that at all or not. So
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I have to figure it out. And a lot of people love just like satisfying videos, like watching foiling or like watching painting, stuff like that. I find like does really well on there, which also does well on Instagram, but it's definitely a different audience on TikTok for sure.
yeah, I agree with you on that. But we were super excited today to have you here. I know that we only have a couple of minutes left here, so I just wanted to like fill it with some questions, because while it's been fun to learn your techniques, I thought it'd be fun for everybody to learn a little bit more about you as well, and to see the person behind the influencer. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before I talk about the rest of the CEU hours?
Nothing really. I mean, I thank you guys so much for having me. I'm so excited that I was able to be here. I'm gonna finish up that doll head, and then I'll post on my page. Amber, I can get photos to you too. But definitely, I am so grateful to have this opportunity. Thank you guys so much. I'm always available in my DMs if you have any questions. You guys can see my Instagram handle down there. But thank you so much for having me. I love getting to like connect with stylists. So I hope some of you guys will reach out on Instagram and say hi.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm just going to take a moment here. If you're in California, you want to jump off, go ahead and jump off. I'm going to take just a moment here to talk about CEUs, but thank you, Carly.
Thanks,
guys.
you
go. We appreciate it. If you're on here and you're from Illinois, we have one last little thing that I want to talk about, and just also say thank you guys so much for being here. We really do appreciate you being here, and we hope that you have enjoyed this class as well. So if you give me a second, I'm going to share my screen because we need to make sure that you get your CEU hours. So in doing so, I'm going to pull up a slide to share with you. All right, so if you are in Illinois, I'm going to take this banner down and make it easier for you guys to see. All right, so if you're in Illinois, at the end of this class, what I need you to do, I know some of you have been typing in your names at the end of this as well, but if you could also type in your email address, this will make it easier because I don't always know by your name what your email address is. So type in your email address into the comments. If you can't get into the comments, you can see my cell phone number at the bottom, the 312-618-0331. You can also text me your email address or just email me. I would prefer you guys to email me or put in your email address somewhere, because then I can send you an email, and it'll probably be a mass email. It'll have a CEU credit hour and then also a sign-in sheet that you will fill out and send back to me. So again, type in your email address, text me your email address, or send me an email at amber.hug@hinkle.com. I need to get that email or by the end of day today. If you're watching this after today, Monday, May 24th, you will not be able to receive your CEU credit hours. It's for those that did attend live. So make sure that if you did watch this live today, make sure that you're sending that in. If you had technical difficulties and that's why you were late or you bobbed off because you had technical difficulties, just let me know that in an email. So again, CEU credit hours, either text me 312-618-0331, your email address, or type it into the comments. And then also you can email me at amber.hug@hinkle.com. And if you do not receive an email with your CEU credit hours, please email me by end of day today. So I will be sending them out after this. So thank you guys again for being on. We really appreciated having you here, and we really enjoyed having Carly here. So thank you again so much for everything. And for those of you that are watching this later on, we hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you all have a great day. And again, thank you guys for being here. Bye.